Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Expanding the Conversation with Richard and Kofi. We wanted to first say thanks to everybody who's been liking our page. We just recently created our new page, and all our videos are going to be posted there. I think we've completed now about 10 episodes, and we appreciate all the support for just engaging with us in conversation. Today, we want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 and education. Disaster for education or opportunity for education? I don't know about, and I'm sure, I shouldn't say I don't know. I feel like for many of us who are parents, we're having to deal with this idea of virtual education. And I'm going to tell you for me, Richard, it is not what it was, they said it was going to be. I didn't realize I was going to be a kindergarten teacher. I'm pretty much in front of a computer with my 5-year-old, and, I'm teaching for about 6 hours a day, a job for which I feel I am woefully unqualified. But, I do my best and I'm trying to improve that situation. But it really brings to mind, is this something that's going to break us or something that's going to make us as an educational system? And I want to put it in context because I know that, this is something that's going on all across the world. And I think that's the first thing. Everyone is struggling with this all across the world. I've seen some dreaded pictures of students in school, behind plastic barriers and things like that. And I know that, a lot of kids are home. There are issues of internet access, computer access, even for teachers who also have their own children, and then they also have to continue teaching. So I don't envy the job of education ministers. I don't envy the job of school boards and head teachers and teachers in general, educators. But this pandemic has helped us to realize that a number of people in our society are really, really important, right? Healthcare workers and teachers in this case. But I want us to have a conversation about what are some of the things that COVID-19 has helped us to realize about our educational system. In which I want to give you an opportunity to sort of just jump in and kick that debate off. But I think there's a lot of things that we could talk about. We just had CXC results, for example, and we just had the what we knew to be the common entrance exam, which isn't that common in the sense that it tends to separate people and try to make them uncommon. And sort of the same with our educational system, where we've got these high tier schools and what may appear to be these lower level schools. What's going to be the impact of COVID-19 on how we perceive education and how we perceive, top school versus not so top school and things like that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, welcome everybody. This is one of those things that sort of, together with everything else that's happening as a result of COVID, has come up in a lot of different discussions. We've really had to adopt as a human culture as a result of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that our technology had evolved faster than we were keeping up with it. And not a bad thing at all. In some cases, I think, we talked about that in the past. We don't really have, like an operating procedures for navigating technology, right? And the virtual world we now live in. But COVID is what I see as a disruptor, right? It's something that showed up and just sort of shattered so many things, right? The way we operated and the way we saw the world and everything else. And so this direct impact on education is certainly now at the forefront, right? To some extent, whether or not a school produces educated, high-performing students is not so much of whether or not it's, the best school in the country, but it's whether or not it's the best technologically prepared one.
Yeah.
And adapts faster to this
Adopt, yeah.
And so that's sort of where we are, right? And I think like everything else, um, I've heard people talk about sort of moments in time that sort of shifts life
Yeah.
drastically, right? And this is one of them.
Right.
Uh, now causes us to really think about where we are, how we deliver education to our students, and then what are the implications for the way we're doing it? Because I think we always have to be in the mode of when we're disrupted rather than almost instinctively try to get back to where we were,
Yeah.
ask ourselves intelligently, what's the better place to be? And we have a lot of our conversations mostly based on Guyana because that's sort of the place close and dear to our
Our
hearts.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not trying to solve the American model through these discussions, but I think in Guyana, in an environment where, a lot of times you talk about the common entrance exam and that sort of separated groups of people. They went off into different schools. Some of them might have even gotten great schools, but they couldn't afford, to
Yeah.
move
I know of that.
because they're all sort of centered in town. They couldn't afford to travel every day, or even if they traveled, they'd probably always be late, right? And so these factors then prevented them from sort of getting that head start. But now we're education, and I like the word that we can democratize education. We're now delivering education to the students where they
Right.
are, and again, they need to have access to be able to do that. Which we could talk about access too, but that's sort of where I think we are. Like we're disrupted, and we have to think
Yeah.
about solutions that really challenges the way we do things. Not so much try to get back to where we used to be, because I think if we try to get back to where we used to be and miss the opportunity to challenge where we are, we lose the lesson to some degree.
Yeah. You make a good. I love where you're taking this. Right. There are times even in a natural system, whether it's a forest fire or a disruption of an ecosystem, where once you've got a perturbation to the system, something has happened. Quite often it's the organisms, right, that have the ability to adjust genetic code, right, in order to sort of adapt to this new environment, are the ones that tend to survive. And the ones that were doing really well, but they lack the genetic mechanism because they've become so complex and so structured that they don't have the flexibility to change and adapt. They tend to go out. So I feel like this is a fight for survival when you think of COVID, not only for our lives, but this is a fight for survival of the educational system. And what you're going to see, I think, is that those who are sort of leading or were leading the pack for a long time, of course, they want to maintain that leadership, right? And so for them, they're comfortable in where they are. And so it's a bit of discomfort to have to adjust and change those genes when you haven't thought about it, and how you're going to maintain sort of your number one, number two, number three, number four, whatever status you felt like you had. But I think you're right. The race is on to see who's going to adapt and who's going to come out, right, of this sort of ahead. The rethinking of it, for me at least, is sort of an equity issue. We've always said that your access to education should not be determined by your zip code, right? To use sort of an American phrase, or where you live, right? The county in where you live, or the village in which you grew up. Your access to education should not be determined by the household income of your family, right? It shouldn't be determined by the shade of your skin and things like that. And so this idea of equity, I think, is really important, that quite often access to high quality education was dependent on a number of things. It was dependent on geography, like you mentioned, where you lived in Guyana. and it was sort of dependent on your performance at the common entrance exam. So imagine you're 9 years old, you have no idea what life is, and folks are telling you have to prepare for this exam that's going to determine sort of the destiny and trajectory of the rest of your life. And so now, you are sort of forcing these kids to study and take this exam. And of course, there are going to be kids who don't. And they don't get one of these so-called top schools. And then what happens is you see their trajectory sort of level off, right, in terms of their ability to achieve academically. And this is on average, of course, because there are still kids who go on to do really well, who may at the common entrance not do so well. But now that we've got COVID and school sort of isn't bound by a physical fence anymore, right? The adjustments, right, in terms of distribution has changed. The access to, let's pick a high school, let's say Queens College, right, which in Guyana is revered as, say, the top school. All of a sudden, we've just realized that, yes, students who go to Queens actually show up physically and they're sitting in the classroom. But now school is not a physical classroom. All of a sudden, school is a virtual place. And so the reach of a Queens College education should really become something that is national. Everybody in Guyana should be able to get a Queens College education because nobody's physically going to a place. So if Queens has a great educational system and that can be delivered virtually, then why not deliver that virtually? If Saints, where we're from, and I think it's the best school. Saints, where we're from, has some of the best teachers, and that education can be delivered virtually. Then what is stopping someone from the Pomeroon or someone in Bartica or someone in the Quarantine from getting a St. Stanislaus College education, a Queens College education, a Bishop's High School education, right? A President's College education. All of a sudden, education no longer has this physical boundary. Everyone, as we rethink the system, can have equal access to great education. I mean, this is an opportunity that COVID has sort of prevented and is forcing us, to go toward.
So I think I agree with you. We certainly need to consider that as an option. And I know you talked a little bit about, not here, but how some of that can happen, right? And if we're recording classes, then it could sort of be available to everybody. You just go out and you choose which one you want. And I think the beauty about what we've learned from some of this is that videos teach. If you make a video once and it's really good, then it's available forever, right? Anybody can use it. And even if you think about the slow learners, they can actually go back and look at the video multiple times to learn something. But I think this is obviously, it's an interesting thought, right? Because what we're essentially saying is that some people who have access to this better thing should now share it with everybody. And I think a lot of times what we struggle with is this sort of what I call what's referred to as the zero-sum game, right? Mm-hmm. So if I give to you and you become better, then you're going to take
have less of it,
my pie, right? And so that's sort of the question that we really need to talk about. Why should somebody from QC or bishops or saints or wherever decide that they should give? And again, I don't think that the best teacher is necessarily at any one of those places for any specific subject, but we make those assumptions for now, right? Because the other thing I think is that we discount, and we notice, is that you might go to a school, one, because you had access, one, because you maybe were a little bit more driven at an earlier age. And not everything you learn in school determines your grade, because you might supplement it with other lessons, right? And so I think there is that element of it. But the why, right? Why should I want to share what I have with somebody else in order for them to be better than they are, so that they could potentially be a competition to me that I've not had to deal with before. And I'm gonna let you jump in on that, but I have a perspective on it. So,
Well, I'll tell you a couple of things. I mean, I feel one, there's always this, I think the old sort of prestige, exclusive club. I think we've sort of grown into that historically, right? It wasn't just about getting a great education. It was about, we're a prestige club, and being prestigious and, being from Harvard or MIT has sort of benefit to it. Somebody just even if you got all D's at Harvard or MIT, and you can say I went to MIT, right? Everybody respects that. And so I think there's this idea of prestige and exclusiveness that people tend to like. But I think our system has always been trying to level the playing field, right? And that a number of parents, of course, started to pay for lessons, right? And this lesson culture became a really big deal, where people would go to school and probably not even learn in a lot of the schools, right? Everyone's just going to sort of, all right, you're going to go to a school to get the prestige, but then you're going to go to lessons to get the grades, right? And then in that way, right, you get the best of both worlds. And then the number of private schools, of course, came on. I think that's the sort of the economy, right, of education driving towards this idea of equity. I want my kids to have the same access as any of John. And in this case, however, there's a barrier to that, because it becomes about finances. And for those who can't afford private school education, those who can't afford lessons, right, then they miss out. And I think what you're saying is, a part of what you're saying is, do we have an obligation, and I think we do we have an obligation to spread good education to everybody? And I know I made a post on Facebook, and it's a matter of clarity. I love teachers. There are a lot of teachers in my family. My sisters, brothers, cousins. A lot of them are teachers. And I have all respect. Of course, I wouldn't be where I am without, and you wouldn't be where you are, Richard, without great teachers. Where I was trying to go to is, how do we take those teachers who are great at what they do and make it available to everybody else, right? And this is where I thought COVID is providing a situation for us to do that. And so if you've got, like you said, if you've got a great math teacher at any one of these schools or anywhere in the country, the great math teacher might be anywhere in the country. We just don't know who they are, right? We tend to often focus on just a couple of schools. There might be a great teacher somewhere that's great in terms of even using the technology and communicating this information. And now all of a sudden, everyone everywhere in the country can have access to that. I think that's something that's worth going after, to really take off our blinders in terms of what school we're from and, which school we're going to. And I feel like the Ministry of Education or some governing body can start to really say, look, we've assembled, the best team of teachers across this country to really start to put out content that students can benefit from. And as you say, once it's out there, then it's out there. And then many of us, parents and teachers, can start to work with students and really start this mentoring process rather than just, teaching. You can really, and I think it's the mentoring a lot of times that pushed a lot of us over the edge to succeed, right? It wasn't just this outpouring of knowledge, but it was to how to use this knowledge to make sure it was reinforced, to be around there to answer questions. And I think that often isn't, sort of promoted, right? This idea that you really got to mentor students and help them along. And so I think there's an opportunity here to really, as you say, democratize and equalize, right? Create a level playing field. And I think COVID has really provided the opportunity for us to do that. But to get back to your point, I think we have an obligation to take the best and spread it around, right? Not to hold on to our pockets of, well, we're the best and we're the best and we're the best. I like to joke like that, perturb people about it. But really, my belief here is everyone should get a great education. right? And I think that has to be the baseline from which we start. Everyone should get access to great education. And we've got an opportunity with COVID to do that.
Definitely. And what I would add to that, my perspective, my evolved perspective on it, because I wouldn't say that I've always believed this, because I was lucky enough to go to Saints, but there is this idea that as everybody has the opportunity to get a little bit better, everybody gets a little bit better, right? And that's what I think is the opportunity here, right? So if more people in the country get a better education, then you actually have the ability to tap into, people with great ideas, regardless of where they live, but also you have sort of just life in general. I mean, if you think about your family, right? If one person is doing really well and everybody's taking the resources from that one person or depending on the resources of that one person, then it means that one person has to work harder. But let's say, more people in the family start doing well, then all of a sudden you've got more resources and people are more comfortable and they're actually living better, right? And one person not fighting the other one for something, but they all have access to more, right? And I think once you understand that it's not a zero-sum game, then you start to realize that it's beneficial to an entire society, to a family, to a village, to a country, to have more people rise up and do better. And I think this is an opportunity to make that happen, or at least take one step in the direction. And I like the fact that it's sort of happening at a time where a lot of people in Guyana have probably the greatest hopes for countrywide success, right? And so it really is one element that I think we can put in place that allows us to take that one extra step towards getting there.
There was something you said, this was offline in a conversation one time we were having, where the model of taking, the model of sort of segregating students based on common entrance performance, right? Where you take the cream of the crop sort of who performed and put them in one school. And so then the system goes from really well performing students, right, to less performing students. Again, I don't like this, Richard, because I think we shouldn't be measuring our kids by these points, that they got. I mean, this is how ingrained this is. I remember getting 542 out of 580 something when I wrote common entrance to get. You remember your number. It's almost like an address, something that you likely will remember forever. But I don't like how it defines students. But I think that's another issue, because I think we're doing something to the psyche of our students with these grades that we're getting, the CXC. It's a lot of depression, mental health issues, right? And I don't like how we measure our students, and our students are more than that. And I think we should be finding other ways to measure success and not sort of attach these labels to them. I really think we have to think about that. That's a discussion for another day. The discussion today, though, is really what is the benefit of taking the cream of the crop and putting them in, say, one institution, and the not so cream of the crop and putting them in another, right? And one argument I hear people make is, look, these kids are really smart, and we have an obligation to ensure that we don't slow their growth. And I totally understand that. I can see that. But also, I feel like there could be sort of this diversity that could happen. Imagine if you've got, like you said, the first thing, all schools, right, should be at a certain level to start. And then if you've got diversity in terms of, just intellect, imagine if you've got a couple of students who are really good with a couple of students who are not so good. Imagine how they can work collectively to sort of bring each other up, right? And sort of inspire each other. But if you take all of the kids who didn't do so well and you say, look, you guys were the losers of this exam, right? You didn't get so good grades, and throw you into a school. Man, I know people who used to hide. They didn't want to say they went to a particular school. They won't even mention it by name because they were so embarrassed. I mean, we really have to find a way, I think, to sort of get away from that system. And COVID, again, nobody sees what school you're going to, right? There's no label attached to it. And I think this is a real opportunity to sort of remove some of those barriers and some of those challenges that we've created with this sort of old archaic system.
Yeah, I that is spot on. We really need to be able to just access the best of everybody in our society. I think that's sort of what's beautiful about being able to get there, where everybody sort of feels like they're doing the things that they're excited about, and they have access to, you know, the things that will actually get them there.
Yeah.
And this is sort of the perfect opportunity. It's also an opportunity to really widen networks, right? So as you know, you're in a class, if you can chat with the people in there and you're having conversations, then it's no longer just, you know, 20 people, or it could be 50 people. And the guy that's, you know, from nowhere shows up and has a brilliant idea or a point, or, you know, explain something to people. And that's why I think virtual is allowing the opportunity to sort of collaborate over wider distances, and really tap into those brilliant minds. And you're right. Like, I mean, if my fate is dependent on what happens at 10 or 11, then that's not good, right?
Yeah.
I think we end up telling a lot of people that they aren't capable.
Yeah.
I hear people use this reference. Oh, maybe my kids aren't book smart, or and you're making this declaration at 10 or 11, right? Or even at 15 sometimes, right? And I think sometimes we miss a lot when we do that, because I'll say some of my greatest sort of moments of epiphany that, oh, maybe I am a little bit smarter than I'm giving myself credit for, came like in my late 30s, right? Early 40s. And so it's kind of like, it doesn't happen always at 10 or 11. I think the opportunity that we have now with this virtual platform allows us to really utilize what's available to help us get over that hump earlier, right? And maybe feel a little bit better about our educational ability, rather than wait until, you know, like me when you're in your late 30s.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to go too long. I think we've made some really good points here and throw them out into the public. You know, can expand on this maybe in a part two. Maybe in a part two we can come back and talk about the specific kinds of technology that are available to achieve some of the things that we're talking about, right? Because again, you're not going to see people wearing uniform and going into school for maybe quite some time. I know some folks are looking at getting, you know, the students back into the classroom. I still believe that in-person education is great. I don't think we're saying that an in-person education is not good, where teachers in front of a classroom teaching. I'm saying that we are forced, and we can't help this, to go virtual. And if we're going to go virtual, we shouldn't try to replicate what is physical in terms of these boundaries that exist in a physical educational world, and try to replicate those in a virtual education world. And I think we've got to be sort of conscious of that the goal shouldn't be to say, this is the way I used to do it in a physical classroom. Now, how can I do the exact same thing in a virtual classroom? Because you're going to find that I don't think the two are necessarily compatible. And so I think we have to think broader. I think we have to think wider. I think we have to think more collectively about how we deliver education across the board. I think we've got to start thinking outside of our schoolyard fences and our school, our classrooms, and start thinking more globally about how we educate an entire country of students, and how we invest in the right technology, right, in order to ensure that students aren't suffering from this transition to virtual education, right? And so investments, of course, in things like the internet, right, and computers is going to become important, right? I would like to see, for example, more local centers throughout the country that have high-speed internet, so that imagine a multiplicity of students who can go to these internet centers. We've talked about this offline, where they can go there and just download their education, and not necessarily have to jump into a minibus, drive up to a school, right, in order to get their education. And so there's a lot of structural things that we can do, technological things that we can adapt to make this happen. Maybe we can talk about that in another conversation. But I think, however, at least going out on this, is that COVID doesn't have to be a disaster for education. It certainly can, it's causing us to rethink education. And I think the opportunity to increase educational equity and fairness is right in front of us. It's staring us in the face, punching us in the face, that we need to stop classifying students based on marks at common entrance and grades at CXC, and just focus on equalizing educational delivery across the entire country.
Yeah, that's a good note to go out on, because this is a long conversation and needs a part two. But I think we can get some other people to weigh in on our next
Hopefully we can
episode.
get some teachers on. Maybe some teachers should inbox us and say,
Yes.
hey, we don't like what you're saying. We'll come on and
or you do. You
or help
like
us understand, right? I mean, that's what we do. We want to expand. So if there are any teachers out there that certainly want to, opine on this and tell us what you think, certainly this is a platform we can have that discussion on.
Yeah. All right.
All right, man.
Let's continue expanding this conversation.